Even to mention the stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with The Mark Stone Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome along to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. Tonight, I'll cross live to Israel to discuss the report into the serious side effects caused by Pfizer's COVID vaccine. After violence between Muslim and Hindu groups in Leicester, we'll hear from senior figures from both communities. Plus, we'll meet this week's Great Britain, a man who has run 100 miles 3 times to raise money for charity. All of that and more coming up, but first an update on the latest news from Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Neil. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Labour leader's accusing the Chancellor of gambling the mortgages and finances of the British people with what he calls casino economics. Sir Keir Starmer's echoed claims from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, saying Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget puts government debt on an unsustainable rising path, something Mr Kwarteng denies. Speaking this afternoon, Sir Keir says the government's fiscal plans won't work.
And after 12 long years of Tory failure, didn't they just show their true colours yesterday? Their driving ideology, make the rich richer and do nothing for working people. Well, this conference is our chance to set out the alternative, to make our case, an economy that works for working people, growth for everyone, everywhere, wherever they are, a fairer, greener future.
Chris Philp, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, though, told us the whole country will benefit.
I think the real gamble would be maintaining levels of tax that are inappropriately high, which risk deterring investment, which risk disincentivising hard work, and which risk driving individuals and companies out of the United Kingdom. By having competitive tax rates, we're encouraging people to work, encouraging them to invest, and encouraging people and businesses to locate here in the UK.
The Labour Party has pledged to create a national care service. It claims 13% of care homes need improvement. The party says private equity firms are failing in their duties to residents. Plans for the service include improvements in pay, workers' rights and training. Arriving in Liverpool this afternoon, Sir Keir is expected to set out a number of key policies at the party's conference, which starts tomorrow. Drivers could be paying an extra £5 for a tank of petrol due to a fall in the value of the pound. Motoring organisation the AA says petrol prices would be at least 9 pence per litre cheaper if the pound had maintained its mid-February value instead of dropping to a 37-year low. Drivers are being encouraged to shop around to find more competitive forecourts. More than 700 people have been arrested in protests across Russia. The arrests come after President Vladimir Putin ordered the country's first military draft since World War II for the conflict in Ukraine. Footage from one protest shows Russian officers manhandling men and leading women to police vans. According to one rights monitoring group, there were protests in 32 cities from St. Petersburg to Siberia. Adventurer Ross Edgley has broken the record for the longest ever open water swim in Loch Ness. Edgley swam continuously for exactly 52 hours and 39 minutes, covering around 49 miles. He also endured temperatures as low as 5 degrees and said it was one of the biggest challenges of his career. And we're getting our first look tonight at the Queen's Ledger Stone in Windsor Castle. The black stone slab has been set into the floor near Her Majesty's final resting place at St George's Chapel. Her name has been inscribed in gold letters alongside her husband, Prince Philip. Members of the public will be able to visit the site from next week when Windsor Castle reopens to visitors. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Neil Oliver live.
Thanks for all of that, Rhiannon. Now, those who speak out are shouted down until they are proved right. Again and again and again, we're made to watch or to endure the crude bullying tactics of the school playground. Reasoned debate and argument have long since gone over the hill into history. Now it's just one long slanging match in which the loudest, angriest and most effectively insulting voices seek to win. So often echoed by mainstream media who hold reasoned voices in contempt, apparently preferring to ridicule and diminish rather than provide courteous space for those who merely have questions in need of answers. Again and again, bear with me. Again and again, those shouted down are, however, revealed as having been right all along. Those who spoke out against lockdowns were shouted down until they were proved right about irreparable harm done, the harms that confront us now in every aspect of our lives. Those who doubted the efficacy and safety of so-called vaccines were shouted down until they were proved right, and it became irrefutable and undeniable that those medical procedures did not work as advertised and had resulted in death and permanent injury for uncounted numbers. Those who spoke out about the existence of rape gangs in British cities were shouted down until they were proved right, and some, just some of the victims finally had their voices heard, and our establishment was shamed for having knowingly stood by for decades while uncounted thousands of the most vulnerable souls were treated like meat by men acting with impunity. All of it was excused and covered up on the grounds that to do otherwise would have brought accusations of racism. Shouting down has become a universal, and even when it is proven wrong, never is there any backing down by the loudest, any real admission of error. Instead, those voices just move on to their next target. But by now, the truth is that too much harm has been done, and any temptation to shy away from confrontation is long behind us. Now more than ever is the time firmly to say, enough, we will not be silenced, however loudly we are condemned. This is precisely the moment when those questioning the dogma must find renewed strength for the fight. Those who questioned the wisdom of sacrificing fossil fuels and nuclear energy on the altar of the so-called green agenda are yet more of those who have been proved right after all. Now millions face a winter of cold and hunger, and futures blighted by the deliberate and wholesale diminishing of opportunities on account of generations of political policies bordering on the suicidal. In the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution that illuminated the entire world, the lights are going out because economically illiterate politicians wanted to live out adolescent fantasies of saving the world. I say it's not the world in need of saving, but us from them and the compound consequences of their vanity and greed. Those who questioned and continue to question the so-called settled science of climate crisis are no longer just shouted down, but demonised as latter-day heretics apparently fit for little less than burning at the stake. Those who simply have questions about the war in Ukraine, about committing billions of pounds to war while Britons face the darkest winter of their lifetimes, are shouted down as Putin-loving enemies of democracy. The shouting down is the response to every contrary voice, and the shouting down on this matter must stop as well. Those who have questions about mass immigration, who fear the inevitable erosion and dilution of British culture by beliefs and behaviours of utterly different sorts arriving in their midst at an excessive rate, are still being shouted down now, even as the religious hatreds of the subcontinent emerge large as life on English streets. If the questions can't be asked, how can answers be found? Name-calling is at the heart of it too, the seat of the fire that burns to a crisp any with the temerity to challenge this orthodoxy or that. Those who questioned lockdowns were called granny killers. Those who questioned vaccines were called COVIDiots. Those who continue to challenge the green agenda are climate change deniers. How effective in the art of shutting down is the dreaded suffix of denier, with all its echoes of 20th century horror. Those who accused the rape gangs were derided as racists, another slur that's all but unsurvivable for anyone who wants to keep a job, far less a place in polite society. Those who have seen at first hand the worst consequences of too much immigration happening too fast, who have watched self-imposed segregation take shape in one town and city after another, the undeniable establishment of ghettos, are similarly defamed, shouted down as having nothing more to offer than hate based on skin colour, when what they are actually pointing out is the crystallising and entrenching of the kind of division and imported religious hatred that ends always and only in the ugliness playing out now in Leicester and Birmingham. The damage done by the delusion, the myth of multiculturalism, the band-aid hurriedly applied when concepts like assimilation and integration were seen to have failed, has hardly been limited to these islands. Not so very long ago, Sweden was regarded as a beacon of caring, sharing, liberal leftism. Not anymore. Since 2018, there have been almost 500 bombings in the towns and cities of a country most people likely still believe mistakenly to be a model of safety and stability, the home of IKEA and St. Greta of Thunberg. It's not just bombs. 47 people have been shot dead so far this year. National Police Commissioner Anders Thornberg is on record describing, quote, an entirely different kind of brutality, closed quote, in ghettoised suburbs dominated by immigrants. Since 2000, Sweden's immigration population, those born elsewhere but now resident, has doubled to 20%. Sweden took in more migrants per capita than any other country during the wave of immigration in 2015. Most of the incomers have been young men. At the recent general election, Sweden's most outspoken anti-immigration party, the Sweden Democrats, emerged as the second biggest in Parliament. Those who have voted for the SDs are shouted down, even as news media carry reports of a new trend in so-called humiliation robberies, during which victims are not just robbed but also degraded while their attackers film the abuse. Despite the hitherto unknown levels of violence and crime, still it's hard for Swedes to speak out about the reality of their situation. Those who point to the existence of ghettos, of no-go areas into which fire and ambulance crews will not venture without police escorts, are shouted down as safety deniers. Can you imagine? Safety deniers, whatever next. When will the shouting down stop? Time and time again, those calling out real problems, real danger, are the targets of tactics shaped always and only to silence dissent, to deride and alienate any who seek to give voice to uncomfortable truth, even just to ask a question. On the other side of the Atlantic, in the US, there is no functioning southern border to speak of. The number of those heading north is now of the 7-figure variety. That's unsustainable in every way. Those speaking out are shouted down as racists and xenophobes, as you would surely expect. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is among those that have taken to moving migrants on, putting them aboard planes and buses and transporting them to self-proclaimed sanctuary states whose politics and politicians declare them as fully supportive of new arrivals. No sooner had 50 of those immigrants touched down in wealthy liberal enclave Martha's Vineyard, however, than the allegedly tolerant and welcoming residents had moved heaven and earth to ensure those pilgrims were back on buses and headed out of sight and out of mind before leaving so much as a footprint on the all-white beach. It was ever thus. Those with enough money and the right friends get to preach about how others must live, while being forever insulated against the consequences. Too many people made guinea pigs for social engineering by holders of influence have been handed too much to bear. Those authority figures who never had any intention of taking part in their own experiment, but saw to it instead that the inhabitants of distant corners they neither knew nor cared about would have to sink or swim in an ill-judged and excessive wave of newcomers, will continue to do as they please, whilst insisting those beneath them in the food chain should simply shut up. But now is most definitely not the time for dissenting voices to lose their collective nerve. Now more than ever, those with questioning, defiant, contrary voices must find the determination to go on. We face economic challenges of a sort most of us have never before had to contemplate. Furthermore, we've been divided among ourselves as never before. Old certainties have been torn away with nothing desirable to replace them, but we must remember what has been taken and so resolve to take it all back. This is no time for silence. After 2 years like no others, when we've been told to be frightened of each other on account of a disease, of our way of life on account of its impact on the world, of the future itself, it might be tempting to submit. Here's the thing, the shouting and the name-calling are the least of it. After COVID, after lockdown, after war, after crisis, after crisis, after crisis, if we don't make all of our voices heard, and right now, ask yourself, what might they try next? All of that is my opinion, of course, and you're free to disagree. Keep your tweets and emails coming all through the show. You can email gbviews at gbnews.uk. You can tweet me as well at gbnews, and I'll try to get to some of your comments later in the show. I'm joined this evening as I recover from that momentary loss of auto-cue altogether.
We've all been there, Neil.
I don't know if you have, Tom.
I thought you did very well.
By a very familiar face, education specialist Tom Buick, and a newcomer to my show, former Army Officer Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Thank you both very much for joining me.
Great being here.
Lieutenant Colonel, what do you make of that atmosphere out there in the world at the moment of such febrile and hot-tempered debate and condemnation?
Well, I mean, it is ridiculous to the extent to which some people are prepared to go to shut down debate. And particularly, I was taken by your comments on the climate crisis. Now, I've been called a climate crisis denier before, but only because I asked the questions and say, is it a climate crisis we've got here, or is it a people crisis? Are there too many people, and how do we sort that out? So I'm certainly a contrarian. Sometimes I've been called an iconoclast, and arguably my military career would have been a lot better if I'd just shut up and kept my nose down.
That's quite nice. I wish I'd only been called an iconoclast. that's quite classy.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. That's quite a nice one.
Yeah.
Tom, you and I have chewed the fat on subjects related to this and like this on more than one occasion. And I think you always take a more tolerant line than me. But how do you feel about the shouting down, the incessant silencing of questioning and debate?
I feel like you absolutely intolerant of those who are intolerant of people's views and opinions within a free democratic society. And as every brilliant monologue, don't worry about the glitches, in the sense that whenever I listen to these monologues, Neil, they're a sort of great intellectual insight backed up with some moral fortitude. And I took three particular things out of your monologue today. One is that, I think as you're saying, we do need to look at why we've lost this sort of art of civility. It used to be a key part of who we are as a people and the West more broadly, as a philosophy, particularly since the Enlightenment period. I think secondly, as you said in your monologue, now is not the time to wither and cower in the face of people who would quote this safety culture, safe space culture at us. Now is actually the time to come out and remind people that if you are truly an inheritor of this Enlightenment spirit and you reject the medieval superstitions of the past, then we have to stand up in that moderate, tolerant way and have the debate, including the difficult debates about multiculturalism, about the green agenda, about all the things that people don't want to hear about. And thirdly, and I think you picked up on this beautifully in your reference to some of the quite disturbing things actually that are going on in a social democratic country like Sweden, a country that actually, unlike Britain, doesn't have this history of empire, and therefore we've had to, over centuries, never mind decades, we've had to kind of have that conversation with the new arrivals, and we've looked to not just the issue of immigration, but integration, and integration around British values. Sweden has no history of that. And of course, who are the beneficiaries of that? It's the far right. 20% of the vote went to a party that has its roots in the neo-Nazis. Now, thankfully, in our constitutional democracy, we haven't ever elected into office extremists of either the far right or the far left. But what happens when you close down debate, when you won't want to talk about open borders, is you fuel the people at the extremes.
Stuart, I introduced you, and you are a military, a defence analyst. I would say that there's something attritional about the way in which it's been one crisis after another that we've almost had foisted upon us. It's been one bit of bad news after another, and it wears people down. You know, eventually one crisis pushed back against is one crisis too many.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and you know, people are forever saying, you know, what's going to happen next? You know, now we've got all the things that you related. The war, people in the war are now looking and saying, what, you know, how long is it going to go on, and how long can it be sustained, and at what point is someone or some people going to say that's enough? We've got to stop here. But it's like in all the topics that you introduced there are groups of people who believe that there's only one truth, and if you're not a believer, then you are the antithesis of what they want you to be. And I think you've just, in this modern age, and, you know, I get it a lot from my kids when they're saying, well, Dad, you can't say that anymore. And I'm saying, well, you know, I don't mean any harm by it. It's just a phraseology. Oh, no, you can't say it because it'll offend people. And frankly, you know, everybody's got a right to be offended, and everybody's got a right within reason to offend. And I'm completely happy with that.
Yes,
Sorry, but on the war in Ukraine, I mean, would we be in the position we're in today with this massive energy insecurity crisis if actually we'd been true to our values in 2014 and Western political leaders had stood up to Putin and said annexing a sovereign part of a European nation is just not acceptable?
Oh, absolutely.
Instead, what they went and did was signed a big contract for a second pipeline with a dictator who he now is using, you know, weaponizing energy, which is, certainly in terms of the current crisis, is a key reason why we've got so much unrest and inflation feeding through. So it's back to your point, Neil, when you fail as a moderate, as a Democrat, to stand up to these types of behaviours, actually you're just storing up problems further down the line.
Yeah, it's always easier to do nothing. It's always easier to say, well, it won't be as bad as you think it's going to be.
We'll pick up these thoughts. We've got to get to a break at the moment, after which we'll get an update on the GB News exclusive about the Israeli report into side effects caused by the Pfizer vaccine. See you in a couple of minutes.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
find its voice
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England,
Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
On radio and online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, recently on this show, we broke a story about researchers in Israel having found evidence of severe and long-lasting adverse side effects caused by the Pfizer vaccine. A leaked video recording of a meeting between the researchers and the Israeli Ministry of Health made plain the researchers' concerns about their own findings. But contrary to the researchers' opinions, the official report from the Ministry of Health declared side effects were short-lived and mild. Most significantly, despite the researchers' desire to keep going with their work, to learn more, their investigation was cancelled by the government. Joining me now is Yafa Shiraz, the Israeli journalist who has been with this story from the beginning. Good to see you again, Yafa. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you so much for inviting me. As you so rightfully said, now is not the time to be silenced. We have to stand up and speak. So I thank you for giving us and other people the opportunity and the courage to do that.
Oh, that's good to hear, Yafa. Thank you for that. Now, since you broke this story, and it was you internationally who broke this story, has there been any response from the Ministry of Health in Israel, or indeed from anyone else?
Well, the answer is from Israel, there is no response. Deafening silence. They didn't even try to challenge our story or say anything about it. And actually, not only have they kept silence, but Neil, the most astonishing thing is that they halted the study. This is such an important study with such concerning findings, and instead of pursuing it, they just pulled the plug.
Remind the viewers, if you will, Yafa, about what the researchers found. You know, I've been through this story several times, and it is a complex set of data. But can you summarise exactly what it was that those researchers learned, or began to think that they understood, and what the funding was pulled away from them?
Yeah, actually, it's not so complicated. What they found was that every aspect of this study's finding contradicted what we have been told about the side effects of this vaccine. We were told that these are mostly local side effects and that they are mild, and that even if in some cases there are some serious side effects, and those are short-term and pass within a few days. So first of all, what the research team found was new signals, new side effects that were not listed by Pfizer and were not local nor mild. Actually, they included neurological side effects or muscle side effects and digestive symptoms that were new. They were not listed by Pfizer, not listed in Pfizer's doctor's leaflet. Second of all, they found that the side effects were not short-term, but actually many times were long-term. Those were long-term events. that lasted weeks, months, and sometimes a year or even more, and in some cases were ongoing, so that the side effects still lasted when the study was over. They also found a phenomenon they called re-challenge, which is, and many cases of re-challenge, which is a recurrence or even worsening of a side effect following repeated doses of the vaccine.
So every time someone was jabbed, first time they got an adverse reaction perhaps, then with the second injection it became worse, third injection worse again.
Exactly. This is exactly what re-challenge means. It means that when you get another dose, the side effects either comes back or even worsens. So it's either the side effects were long-term, or when they already stopped, they came back after repeated doses. Okay. So in fact, the researchers were so worried about those side effects, those findings, that their conclusions were that these findings, first of all, they said they established causal relations between the vaccine and the side effects, especially this phenomenon of re-challenge. Professor Berkovich, the head researcher, explicitly stresses that this phenomenon, the re-challenge, increases the chances of causality from possible to definitive. And even more than that, the researchers explicitly warn the Ministry of Health that they need to think medical legal. They need to think carefully how to present this finding to the public, because they contradict what they said, because the Ministry of Health, and not only in Israel, continuously claim that the serious side effects are rare, short-term, and transient, and told people to go get vaccinated anyway. So now the researchers warned the officials that they might open themselves to liability. So when these findings of the team's study contradict the Ministry of Health's safe and effective narrative, instead of changing their approach, they decided to put a stop to the study because they didn't like the findings. That's all. So, and furthermore, they didn't even pursue the most severe cases found in the study. Nearly turns out that there were 155 serious cases in adults, including cardiovascular events, which required hospitalizations or ER visits. And the team was talking during the meeting about them and explaining that they need to analyze these cases and that they haven't yet had the time to do it. So they need more time to continue the study. And moreover, the Ministry of Health now knows about people that were seriously harmed and suffered re-challenge, because, this is a very unique study because the form wasn't anonymous. So they know about these people whose conditions got worse by each successive vaccination. They know about them. And that means that there is a great likelihood that there is a causal relation in their case. So they know exactly who those people are, and their duty is to get in touch with them and check on them, and of course to compensate them, but most importantly to follow their condition. Not only for them, but to know what happens in these cases.
Yafa, are you surprised that this story has not received greater interest from around the world? Given how many billions of doses of the Pfizer vaccine have gone out there, and also the undeniable fact that Israel was acting effectively as a laboratory for the world. Much of the world was watching what was happening in Israel and making decisions based on what they understood from the rollout of the vaccine in Israel. And yet, no one's following up your story.
Exactly. It's not exactly no one. We are getting attention from around the world, not from Israel. From Israel, actually, almost zero attention. Actually, not almost, but zero attention up until now. But we are getting some attention from the world. We had the Epoch Times covering our story. But yes, you're right. It's amazing because Israel was serving as the world's laboratory. And our findings were presented to the CDC, to the FDA, and we served as a model country. So it's a global issue. It's not just a local issue. It's not just Israel. It's not just the Israelis who suffered. It's a global issue. Yeah, I agree.
What will you do next? What will you do next? Are you still in touch with those researchers and those that brought this information to you in the first place?
Unfortunately, the researchers themselves are not cooperating. The Epoch Times just a few days ago tried to reach out them again, and they did not respond. One of them said that she's no longer part of the project, which, strengthens the suspicion that they really closed, put the plug out and they closed the study. So the researchers are also, they have no sources to continue the study.
Yafa Shiraz, it's a fascinating and troubling story, and we will definitely be staying in touch with you and to see what what the consequences are of what you have unearthed so far. So, Yafa Shiraz, thank you very much this evening. I listened to Yafa tell that story about government-funded researchers' alarm about side effects from the Pfizer vaccine, and I honestly struggle to comprehend the lack of response from around the world. As Yafa said, Israel functioned as a laboratory for the wider world. Everyone was watching their vaccine rollout. And yet when researchers there said they needed to know much more about what they had seen so far in relation to adverse side effects, the government pulled the project, having told the public that all was well. End of story. I'm joined now by Dr. Will Jones, editor of the daily Skeptic, a publication that did follow up on the story to help me interpret what's going on. Good evening, Will. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Neil.
What was your instantaneous reaction to the story that came out of Israel regarding the Pfizer vaccine?
It was an incredible leak and a bombshell story, and we followed it up as quickly as we could and put it out there. And we expected it to be taken up by major news outlets, by newspapers, by broadcast media, or I say we hoped it would be, because it was such a major story. As you say, the laboratory of the world, the Pfizer rollout in Israel, special contract with the Israeli government in order to study the vaccine and the effects of it. And here there was leaked data. It was a major story, and also it's a cover up as well, and scandal. And so we expected it to be big news, and when it wasn't, it's just and Neil, to your credit, you have followed this story up, but in the mainstream media, you are almost or entirely alone.
Now, this was. I keep going over the same facts because they don't seem to be gaining traction anywhere. This was official research commissioned by the Israeli government, and yet it's being ignored even though it's out there. Considering it more widely, how do you explain or comprehend the way in which the bald facts being exposed are not being attended to?
It's hard to understand, isn't it? It's what is going on. I think one of the, to me, what seems to be going on is there's a narrative, and people have bought into this narrative, and people believe it, and so I've been in touch with journalists and editors at national newspapers, and who I know are sympathetic to these stories, and saying, "Will you run it?" But they can't, and they're not allowed to. Either they won't run it, or they try and run it, and it gets spiked. It gets stopped, and it's hard to know exactly what is stopping these stories like these from getting out there and making the impact that they should. It's like you drop a stone into a pool and you expect to see ripples, and yet you don't, and nothing happens. And I think to a large extent it's that people believe in the mainstream narrative of the safe and effective vaccine. I think psychologically they have to believe in it. A lot of people, they've taken the vaccine. It's what they've been told by the authorities. It's created this whole narrative and reality based on what we've been told. And people feel a need to believe it. They have to believe it, and it seems to have captured their minds. There's a technology entrepreneur called Steve Kirsch, and he's been taking a lot of interest in the safety of the vaccines. And he contacted, and he's got contacts in the FDA in America, the people who look and CDC who look after vaccines in America. And he says to them, he says, "What's going on? Is it a cover up? Do they know?" And to his surprise, these people inside the FDA, they came back and they said, "No, the people here, almost to a man, almost every single one, is a true believer. They're blue pilled. They actually believe that the vaccines are safe and effective." And it's like there's blinkers come up, and they just don't want to see, and they just don't want to hear, and won't see and won't hear evidence that contradicts that. And it's a psychological phenomenon. People talk about mass psychosis, and it just seems to be something like that going on. That it's just that there's just this media blackout, and that editors won't cover it, journalists won't cover it, broadcasters won't cover it, public don't want to hear it. Or a lot of people don't want to hear it, and how do you break that spell? How do you overcome that? How do you overcome that's a huge psychological barrier that's been put up, and to see this story have the impact that it needs to, because these are about serious injuries. These are, as you've said, billions of vaccine doses, huge numbers of injuries that have been done, serious, long-lasting injuries, as we were hearing from Yaffa, and we need to avoid repeating mistakes as well. A lot of people might want to say, "Oh, well, it's been done now, so there's no point in looking back." But that's obviously completely the wrong attitude, because because they're just going to keep on doing this. We'll keep on making the same mistakes. They keep on rolling out the same things. We've seen in America that the CDC, the FDA has authorized the latest COVID vaccine without even having a trial. They literally injected 8 mice and to look at supposedly and measure the antibodies in 8 mice, and then the vaccine approval committee said, "Well, that's fine, you can go ahead," and they've started injecting it into millions of arms. They will keep on making these mistakes if the stories like this don't get through. So I think editors and journalists who are watching your show, Neil, I think they need to start seeing that this is a story that needs to be told, and they need to find a way of telling it and find a way of easing the public into a truer narrative about these vaccines.
Dr. Will Jones, the Daily Skeptic editor, thank you very much for your time this evening. Fascinating insights there. Tom, it's quite something, isn't it? I mean, that's a major story coming out of a country we were all watching, and yet it has dropped, as Will says, like a stone into a pool, and yet no ripples.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's so because of some mass psychosis, as he was suggesting. And we should remember, Israel is one of the few democracies, genuine democracies in the Middle East. And so, if there's public concern about any medical intervention, including this particular vaccine, that is for the public policy makers, for the politicians, including the opposition in the Knesset in Israel, to take that up and to insist on a public inquiry. I think we need to have, if it's not already part of the terms of reference for the public inquiry that's going to happen around COVID, hasn't got underway yet, that vaccine efficacy is one of the things that actually we have a proper public inquiry about. Because in the end, we've got to ground any debate about these vaccines, Neil, in the science. And the fact is, the vaccine did deliver for those who took it, particularly of a certain age, over 50, underlying morbidities. The data, you saw it. The hospitalisation and deaths went down. The issue is, was the vaccine suitable for everybody? And I don't think it was. And Denmark, interestingly, has banned now the vaccine for the under 50s because it doesn't see there's vaccine efficacy there.
Stuart, I saw that story. When Yafa got in touch with me with that story, I thought, well, that's it. That's a game-changing bit of information. Everything about it ticked the right boxes. It was official research. It was paid for by the government. And yet when we put that information out there, there was just a communal shrug of shoulders as though, so what?
It's a sort of collective cognitive dissonance, I think. And you get it in all walks of life. Don't give me that information because I don't want to know that because that's going to change the path I'm going down. The thing that I thought of being a child of the 50s straight away was I thought thalidomide. And now, I don't know if the research in the effects of thalidomide was suppressed in any way.
It was for years. It was denied for years.
And there's lots of people my age who have all sorts of unfortunate disabilities because of that. And I'm very lucky not to be one of them. And it struck me that this is exactly the same sort of thing. We have another thalidomide.
But that's a really good example because in the end, the pharmaceutical companies were brought to account, they were brought to book, and the truth came out. I think the challenge is here, and where I do agree with you, Neil, in terms of ticking some of these boxes, is the real fear here, I think, are those state public health officials, policymakers, politicians who procured the vaccine, who put into legislation indemnity, by the way, for these pharmaceutical companies. So even if it does come out in the wash, actually, that this is damaging to public health, they won't be the ones that will be sued because they've been indemnified against it. And, of course, why this is really, really important at the end of the day is this isn't like any other drug or vaccine where there was choice. We had countries like Israel. It wasn't just the medical laboratory, it was the social laboratory. Remember, they introduced the first green pass, the vaccine passports. They were the ones who said, we will deny access to basic public services if you do not take the vaccine. That translated over here to students not being able to go to nightclubs unless they took the vaccine. So that's what makes this really, really important at the end of the day from a public policy point of view, and that's why we need a proper public inquiry into it.
I mean, you're mentioning the specific and I suppose almost unique case of thalidomide, and perhaps it's not directly analogous to what the situation is with these particular medical procedures that are rolling out around us now. I'm simply aghast that even when research comes out that challenges the narrative, it just falls away. It doesn't gain the traction. This is what I don't understand. What kind of information has to come forward and who does it have to come from before people say, well, wait a minute, maybe we should take a breath here. We've already given billions of doses to billions of people. Maybe and we're still doing it.
Absolutely right, suppression of information. But it is, it's the tyranny of the prevailing orthodoxy, isn't it? It's good. These inoculations are good for you, and they are for a large number of people have been saved and helped. But when the information comes out that contradicts that, it seems to be suppressed.
That efficacy is not proven. No. That is part of the narrative. Safe and effective is still out there, and it's a hollow ghost.
But why
it's a hollow ghost of a statement. You cannot any longer say safe and effective until much more is known about the long-term consequences.
Absolutely.
They didn't function as vaccines as people understood vaccines previously. So they didn't act as advertised.
No.
And as to safety, that is the kind of information that ought to be being exposed by this kind of research and is being exposed by this kind of research, and yet no one pays it any attention.
Well, no one's really paid much attention to the fact the Danish government has now outlawed vaccines for the under 50s. So what's going on there? I mean, what do they know? What do those public health officials and epidemiologists know about the efficacy of the vaccine that we don't?
Indeed. We'll have to move on, unfortunately. After the break, as the pound falls to a 37-year low against the dollar, we'll find out why that's good news for some UK firms. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland,
Wales,
And Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio, and online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, the pound has been falling in value throughout 2022, as I understand it. Last week, it fell below $1.09 for the first time since 1985. Analysts say the recent drop was a consequence of investors taking fright at the thought of how much money the government will have to borrow to pay for the sweeping tax cuts Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng announced in his mini-budget on Friday. US investment bank JP Morgan said it was about, quote, a broader loss of investor confidence in the government's approach, close quotes. Joining me to help me understand what it all means is Marco Forgione, Director General of the Institute of Export and International Trade. Good evening, Marco.
Evening.
Thank you for joining me. I find this very challenging information to try and get my head around, with my schoolboy arithmetic letting me down. Who benefits and who loses when the pound does this?
So there's quite a lot to unpick, actually, Neil, from the budget, and there are a number of reasons for that. What the Chancellor announced yesterday is a significant break with the orthodoxy of the past 35 years, and it's clear with this Prime Minister and this Chancellor that the government believes fundamentally that low taxes are going to spur growth and to turbo boost the UK economy. And there are issues. We have a significant problem with productivity in the UK compared to other nations. And we have seen over the last several years a decline in the number of businesses involved in international trade, exporting and indeed importing. So you ask about who benefits from the pound being at the level where it is against the dollar. Well, it's a huge opportunity for UK businesses to exploit and trade, particularly with the US, but with other nations as well. So hopefully what we will see now is a spark of innovation and for UK businesses to start to grow and expand their international markets.
But who loses? This has to be bad news for everyone else on the other side of that equation, surely.
So the issue is if it is cheaper to sell UK goods, it makes it more expensive to bring goods into the UK, which in itself may act as a spark for more manufacturing and for more investment into the UK. And the government is looking for foreign direct investment to come in to the UK through both its free port policy and the enterprise zones, which were announced yesterday.
What does it mean for people, the individual man and woman on the street, when the pound is falling like this? How will we notice it and feel it?
So if you are buying goods that have come in from overseas, then they will become more expensive.
Forgive me if my interpretation of this is just wholly too basic, but Liz Truss talked about 100+ billion to alleviate the energy price crisis, and Kwasi Kwarteng is proposing will be borrowing essentially to create these tax cuts. Is all of this not just the same solution again and again and again? Is it not just creating money? Is it not just a version of quantitative easing, just more and more money being whipped up out of nowhere?
So the aim of what they're doing is clear. They are borrowing money on the market, and what we saw as a result of the announcements yesterday actually is the cost of that borrowing has increased. We've seen an increase on the 10-year yield for UK gilts. But there will be a point where hopefully that will become more attractive to foreign investors to then buy, which will drive down the cost of the borrowing. But it's clear that what the government has done is a fundamental shift and change from what's been happening for the past 35 years.
Tom?
I don't think you have to be an economics expert to know that this country's been living beyond its means for some time. And in a sense, that's what both political parties, the whole political class, over 3 decades, through, in my view, a combination of statism and crony capitalism, that's why we've arrived at the point where things are so desperate with the patient now, the British economy on the table, that this is a gamble by a new type of conservative, we haven't seen this for some time, who are going out on the nation's credit card and saying, if we jump-start the car, it might have a failed battery, but it might just be enough to get us back to growth. And it is a big if, and that's the theory. But why I think the exchange rate is really important is because in the end, that's like a nation's stock price. And the more the pound plummets against a basket of other international currencies, the less international confidence there is overall in our economic strategy. It's what's called the kindness of strangers in economics. The more we alienate that group of international investors, and we're borrowing something like 10% of our annual GDP just on day-to-day current account spending, that is not a sustainable path in any country's economic future. If you were every month, Neil, going out and spending 10% of your domestic household income on your credit card, sooner or later those creditors are going to run out of patience with you.
And so I think what we've seen with the budget, the announcement yesterday, is a shift, an attempt to try something different. Now, will it work? Will there be time?
Well, at least the metrics are clear, right, in the medium term.
Will it fall further? I mean, is it fallen to its lowest level and become stable at that point, or will it fall again?
The likelihood is, my assessment would be, there's a chance it's going to fall further because
and how far?
The price point of the pound, which is similar to the euro and to the yen, is an indicator of the strength of the dollar currently. So the relationship between the dollar and the pound and the euro and the yen is a testament to the policies that are being pursued by the Fed in America, and the interest rate rises. There's every indication that the Fed is going to continue to increase the interest rate in the States, which is going to have an impact on sterling and the euro and other international currencies.
At what point, if it's falling or sliding at the moment, at what point does it go into some kind of free fall? Currencies crash, don't they? I mean, what's the point of no return?
Currencies crash when there's an absolute loss of faith in what the value of that currency, and also the ability of that government, that nation, to spark the growth. So what the government have done yesterday is to say, we believe the only way to get the heartbeat of the economy going again is to reduce the taxation, to liberalise and to spark investment with the enterprise zones, the reduction in the extension of the annual investment allowance, the corporation tax, keeping that at the same rate. All of that is about trying to get money flowing in for business to grow and for them to employ more people. And it's just one other thing, if I may. Just, if this is really going to work, this is going to achieve its ambition, we have got to get businesses trading And the Institute of Export and International Trade, who I'm here representing, believes that there is a huge amount that could have been done that has been missed. And there needs to be a task force within government focused on micro, small and medium enterprises to give them the skills, to give them the knowledge, to give them the capability to trade internationally, because it's only by us making things here and exporting them that we're genuinely going to achieve an increase and turn around the economy.
Marco Forgione, you sound determined and confident, and I will just take that and run with it.
But it's
sometimes I wonder if it isn't just lipstick on a corpse, but I'm a natural pessimist. But thank you, Marco.
Great.
Have to get into another break, after which we'll be looking at the riots taking place between Hindu and Muslim communities in Leicester, as well as the protests in Iran. See you in another couple of minutes.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel. Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live on GB News, TV and radio. We've got lots more between now and 8 o'clock. In a moment, we'll discuss the recent violence between Muslim and Hindu groups in Leicester. An expert on the war in Ukraine gives us his take on this week's dramatic developments. I'll be honest with you, Lieutenant Colonel Stewart, you are that expert.
Thank you very much.
So brace yourself. Plus, we'll meet this week's Great Britain, a man who has run 100 miles not once, not twice, but 3 times to raise money for charity. But first, here are the latest news headlines brought to you this evening by Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Neil. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Labour leaders accusing the Chancellor of gambling the mortgages and finances of the British people with what he calls casino economics. Sir Keir Starmer's echoed claims from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, saying Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget puts government debt on an unsustainable rising path, something Mr Kwarteng denies. Sir Keir says the government's fiscal plans won't work.
And after 12 long years of Tory failure, didn't they just show their true colours yesterday? Their driving ideology, make the rich richer and do nothing for working people. Well, this conference is our chance to set out the alternative, to make our case, an economy that works for working people, growth for everyone, everywhere, wherever they are, a fairer, greener future.
Well, Chris Philp, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, told us the whole country will benefit.
I think the real gamble would be maintaining levels of tax that are inappropriately high, which risk deterring investment, which risk disincentivising hard work and which risk driving individuals and companies out of the United Kingdom. By having competitive tax rates, we're encouraging people to work, encouraging them to invest, and encouraging people and businesses to locate here in the UK.
The Labour Party has pledged to create a national care service. It claims 13% of care homes need improvement. The party says private equity firms are failing in their duties to residents. Plans for the service include improvements in pay, workers' rights and training. Arriving in Liverpool this afternoon, Sir Keir is expected to set out a number of key policies at the party's conference, which starts tomorrow. More than 700 people have been arrested at protests across Russia. The arrests come after President Vladimir Putin ordered the country's first military draft since World War II for the conflict in Ukraine. Footage from one of the protests shows Russian officers manhandling men and leading women to police vans. According to one rights monitoring group, there were protests in 32 cities, from St. Petersburg to Siberia. And we're getting our first look tonight at Queen Elizabeth's final resting place in Windsor. The picture of the Black Ledger Stone has been released by Buckingham Palace. It's been set into the floor of George VI Memorial Chapel, where the monarch was buried on Monday. The new stone's engraved in gold in memory of the Queen, her parents and her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. It'll open to the public from next Thursday. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Neil Oliver live.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Religious violence in Leicester between Muslim and Hindu men has spread to Birmingham. Long held up as a positive example of multiculturalism, Leicester has been home for decades to families of both faiths. What does the future now hold for the city and therefore others that are home to multiple cultures? To help us understand a complicated situation, I'm joined now by Dr. Sheikh Ramsey, Imam and Director of the Oxford Islamic Information Centre, and Pradeep Bhardwaj from the Swindon Hindu Temple. Good evening to you both, gentlemen.
Good evening and God bless.
Dr. Ramsey, if I could start with you, has a clear picture emerged of what triggered events in Leicester?
I believe, of course, there are many speculation, but I believe it is RSS. Many times, is several years we told the government RSS, which is one of the party of the Indias, and they started, of course, and what they want to do is to have one religion and the Hindus, and the rest has to go out or convert. This is what's happening, and of course the root coming again. I said the root coming from the India, and the RSS again. What they doing at the moment, training the young people in the United Kingdom, which is a very worrying. The young children in the United Kingdom, they go 60 of them every year to India to train what, I don't know. Of course, if it was a Muslim going and training, we should have said, everybody says they are terrorists. But what is happening and what coming here is a 72, that has been said, of course, 72 organization which teaching the RSS with the young people in this country. And of course, Jon Snow, he had a very big investigation on the matter. I spoke to him as well about it. It is very important, and he shows that, of course, the money. These people going to get trained and coming back here. I don't know for what reason. The government of United Kingdom should find out for what reason. And of course, the money which the people pay to the is a charity registration called HSS SEVA, which he got the money, and of course, again, I said it has been investigated by Channel 4, Jon Snow.
Dr. Ramsey,
where is the money going? They don't know. They goes to India and disappear.
These are significant and serious claims that you're making there. If I could come to you now, Pradeep, how do you react to that assessment of the situation? My question was, what had triggered the recent upsetting violence in Leicester? How do you respond?
Well, I think first of all, it's very disturbing to hear of these incidents of outbreaks of violence in Leicester and Birmingham. I think there is only one thing we can do at the moment as a community leaders, to condemn without any hesitation that this should not happen in the UK in the first place. And I think of all the places to talk about, Leicester, for example, if you look at the demographics of Leicester, I mean, we have, just upwards of 30% Christians, around 20% Muslims, and I would say to equal measure, just under 16% or so Hindus. And Leicester should be one place. It should be a beacon of social cohesion. And this kind of thing happening where we have, some people may call it race riots, maybe hints of sectarian violence, and all these things. I think this should be the last thing we want to see here. But I think looking ahead, more important is how do we stop this from rampaging around other towns and cities? I think that is very important. There could be, people say there are a lot of, let us say, trigger points in this cricket match, and obviously social media had a role to play in this and things like that. But I think it's still early days. I'm sure that the authorities, including the police and intelligence, they must be looking at it.
But why there? As you say, Leicester has long been held up as a success story for multiculturalism. So, of all places, why Leicester and why now? Has something changed in terms of the proportions, the balance between groups? Has there been a change that might, at root, explain what has erupted recently?
Yeah. Neil, I would like to, I don't know if you're speaking to me or not, I would like to say, again, the Leicester, I've been living there for many times, teaching there and they were all okay. But unfortunately, again, the root coming from the India, the root coming from the Kashmir, these are happening. And again, the government, you don't understand it. At the moment, the government of India says there is on the registration, the national certificate or national registration, which called RNC or NCR, NRC. Sorry, this is they do not give it to Muslim. Anyone can apply against except the Muslims. There are many things happening, and of course, it is again. I said some time ago for other TVs that it is started. It is started, and if the government of UK do not intervene, if the United Nations do not intervene, 25 million Bangladeshis, which they were originally for about 200, 300 years there, they want to throw them out. There are, again, I'm saying it, there is no problem. There are camps, they want to make a concentration camps to put it like a China. You have to remember, a United Nations must intervene. It is going to spread in this country. They have been trained. These RSS, these young people has been trained, and of course, unfortunately,
Dr. Ramsey, I just have to come in. I have to come in on what you're saying. You're very much referencing
Buddhists. I love Hindus. I love the Hindus.
Dr. Ramsey, you're very much referencing what's happening in the subcontinent, what's happening in India. I need, though, to consider what's happening in Leicester, in Birmingham, in England. Pradeep, can I come to you? Is there a possibility of this having happened in Leicester spreading elsewhere? There's already been something. There have already been incidents in Birmingham. This having happened in Leicester, are we looking at something that's going to spread?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful. I mean, again, I think I would say this: whether my fellow friend here on the program agrees with the policies of the Indian government or not, I think we have to be mindful we cannot solve the problems of the world here on the streets of UK. I mean, obviously, you are entitled to your point of view, but that is something that the government of India has obviously chosen to undertake. And if the British government has any issues with that, let the British government take that up with the Indian government. But we cannot be living these issues and trying to settle them on the streets of UK. That is my point. And that is precisely, I think, what we are discussing here. Let us discuss what went wrong. Let us discuss whether the policing response was robust, timely, and proportionate or not. But we cannot solve the problem of Kashmir in Leicester and Birmingham. Rest assured. Again, I think there are a lot of other ways we are seeing. Obviously, there is no denying. We are seeing a more assertive politics in the UK. We are seeing, obviously, identity politics. We have to look at, whether the intelligence mechanism has been functioning the way it should be or not. But this is something which has been happening for a long time. But you're right. I think now we are seeing increasingly these flashpoints are becoming more and more frequent and more and more violent, and that is worrying for me. But I would say, yes, I think going back to what my fellow friend was saying, what goes on in some of these HSS organizations. Well, on Friday, I know what goes on. Yes, in the UK, in many towns, we have what he's referring to, the gatherings. These are gatherings of children called Bal Gokulam, we call it. Bal is children. And basically, a bunch of children's getting together so they do not lose their cultural heritage. They are chanting shlokas in Sanskrit. Obviously, they are learning about keeping in touch with the Indian and Hindu culture. That is what goes on. So I've seen a lot of them. Sometimes I go there as well. So I think let us not generalize. If there are obviously, if there is terrorism being exported, if there is fundamentalism being exported, we have to tackle that. The authorities, I'm sure personally, I would admit, they have to do a better job in understanding what is going on necessarily in our societies.
That's right.
Dr. Ramsey, that does sound reasonable. That does sound reasonable, does it not? The solution lies in leaving behind the problems of India in India, and the recipe for peace in the streets of the UK is for that to be left where it is and not to be imported and fought out on the streets of English cities.
Absolutely. What we need to do, of course, Neil, I was agree with my fellow brothers. God bless you. I'm a part of Interfaith. We are trying to keep all, and as I said, I love the Hindus and all. However, we need to see the root of the problem is there. And of course, again, it is not right when the children, but you can see, they say this to Pakistan. Have a look. They said this to Pakistan, this to Pakistan. How come? Is a very important things which you have issue. Why they don't say something else? These are important. Therefore, what we can do, if the government, UK and the United Nations look at to see what is happening, and is that they want to conquer that? I don't know why they doing that. Because again, I say it is going to go on and on and on. If you put it down here, it's got this what's it called? This. Very important. It's got many heads, this problem, and you close it here, you come other way, they will come to Birmingham. Other is a start. What we need to do, my brother Hindus and the brother Muslims, together we have to do it, and we can advise our children not to go. And again, what you have to say, advise the children not to go to train in the RSS training them, and it is wrong, which we know. RSS killing the Muslims with the woods in the India. Have a look. They killing him completely. They destroy him. They take a hijab off, and this is wrong. And of course, the Muslim retaliate in other countries, and after that, this is spreading all over.
Clearly,
What
clearly,
we
this
need
is
to
not
do,
clearly
the
this is not
government
something that we're
of
going to
the
find a
UK
resolution for
must
this
help
evening. But thank you both for your contributions. Thank you for a very civilised debate between the two of you. Thank you both, and we will pick this up another time, I'm sure. Thank you for now. You get a real sense there, don't you, of the on the one hand the desire for togetherness, but the distance.
There's not much common ground there, is there? And I'm still not really any clearer why this broke out in Leicester when it did.
No.
When all the different faith groups, the sort of British South Asian faith groups, seem to have been getting on so well for so long.
And neither contributor there seemed to have that answer.
Yeah, I mean, really disappointing. And actually, that was the first in-depth discussion, so credit to GB News, of actually being able to talk to representatives of different parts of a community and try to understand what's going on. But I have to say, I was just left more befuddled by it, really, because as you said, Neil, we should not be importing the challenges and the problems of another, in this case, the subcontinent. We know going back to partition, there are issues still between India and Pakistan and between those two parts of the Hindu and Muslim community. But we're talking about third-generation British Pakistanis, British Indians who've been educated in our schools with British values. Why are they engaging in
that's the question that hasn't been answered.
And it ultimately seems so self-destructive for something that has fairly deep foundations already in Leicester. Moving on, though, protesters in Iran are risking everything, life itself, to vent their anger after a woman arrested for not covering her hair properly later died in custody. 22-year-old Kurdish woman Mahsa Amini had been arrested by the morality police for wearing her hijab in an improper manner. And protesters allege her death was caused by a severe beating. The number of people killed in protests so far is already in double figures and expected to rise. Now, I was hoping to be joined now by political commentator Maher Touzi, himself the son of an Iranian refugee, but at the moment our connection to him is not working, so I'll discuss this with the panel. Stuart, it's very much a multicultural feel this evening. There's that trouble from the subcontinent has somehow or other been imported to Britain. There's no denying it, and we're also, but looking back at another country with a history of trouble in recent years, Iran, and anger at the grassroots level surfacing there too, although for completely different reasons.
Well, I mean, it's a good question. Will what's happening in Iran also be exported to other parts of the world? Arguably, it already has, because Iranian dissidents don't go out at night or are always very conscious of their movements and their safety. I guess the world just seems to be bubbling with, as you put it, anger translating into violence. And of course, the death of the 22-year-old is shocking, really, if that's what happened, if the result of a beating.
I think we have Maher Touzi back with us now. Are you there, Maher?
Yes, I am. How are you?
There you are, sir. Thank you for joining me. To get into it right away, you say on Twitter, I noticed, that you've been cancelled by Iran. What's the story there?
I'm officially banned from entering Iran. If I go, I'll be arrested and much more. Let's just say.
What are you hearing from people there, from friends, from family?
Yes, it looks very different to any other movement or protest that you had. I mean, for those who are not familiar, coincidentally at least, since the 1979 revolution, every 10 years or so, around the same time, every 10 years, there's been a spark, an excuse for a protest movement. In 89, 88, 89, you had the Mujahideen, the communists of Iran, who failed. 10 years later, it was a student movement. The newspaper was shut down. 10 years later, in 2009, it was a rigged election. And then this time, it started in 2019 because of actual cost of living crisis. And the sanctions actually started to work, but obviously it hit people. So what happened over the last few days? A lot of people in the media, I do have to obviously say, Neil, thank you. If shows like yours are only a few shows that we are seeing on the mainstream media that are actually talking about this properly. this topic, and it's absolutely shameful the mainstream media are completely ignoring it. But it's not necessarily, they keep saying, well, a 22-year-old woman who unfortunately was killed because of the hijab rules that they have. It was just a spark. And unfortunately, those incidents happen on a regular basis. The people were just essentially just waiting for that right moment. Some people on Twitter I see saying, oh, this is a women's right movement. This is just opposition against one person dying, and they just want justice and they'll go home like Black Lives Matter or something. It's not that. It is actual for regime change. And there is, for once, for the first time, there is unity compared to all the other movements that you had every 10 years. There seems to be the majority, the consensus is behind the idea of having a regime change, having a referendum, and being behind one leader who is the crown prince in exile, Reza Pahlavi. They ideally, a lot of people seem to be wanting a democratic constitutional monarchy. They don't want to go back to absolute monarchy, but they want to have a British-style democratic constitutional monarchy. Obviously, I can't speak for every single Iranian. There are different ideas out there, but this is it does feel different. There are a number of towns and cities who've been taken over by people. That's why it feels different.
It's quite something to watch, though. There's endless footage of individual women and girls taking off their head coverings and and throwing them away or putting setting them on fire or whatever. And protesting in that way in Iran is life and death. It's quite something for every single, even if it's a majority that, as you say, that are in favour of a regime change, every individual acting in that way is doing something quite extraordinary.
Absolutely spot on. And the Iranian culture, Persian culture, they're not revolutionary people. So in the past, unfortunately, you had a situation where the police and security forces would shoot and kill a number of protesters, and it just shuts down the whole thing. People will just disappear and go into hiding. This time, it seems to be that they don't have fear anymore. They've lost that, which is very powerful. You can, as you said, not only that women are taking off their headscarves and burning them, men and women, young and old, are slightly getting more aggressive. This revolution, this uprising, they still see it as self-defense. But they are now targeting police stations. They are targeting police officers, the security forces, the Basij, as they call them, the Revolutionary Guard members. They seem to be more aggressive and more essentially fed up that none of those attempts worked. In the past, they could, like, for example, have a protest and have one of the police officers crowded, but they always let them go. But this time, not only it's aggressive, they're actually very vocal about Islamism. They are basically, one of the chants is, take your Islam and go. And it's fascinating to see that there is this fight against Muslim rule in Iran. At the same time, in the UK, we just had Ajnam Chowdhury being free again, to be allowed to go out there on the streets, inciting violence and plotting to bring down the country. It's absolutely astonishing what the state of this country when it comes to the complacency against Islamism, and Iranians are actually leading the way against extremism.
So is it as amongst other things a call for secularism?
Yes,
if it's
absolutely.
Take your Islam and go, is that Islam to be replaced by a secular regime?
Yes, I mean, the issue is that Iran, until the 1979 revolution, and even now, you have, because it was a former empire and it was a former great nation, you have various ethnicities and religions and everything in there. So you have Persians, but you also have the Kurds, you have the Turks, you have the Christians, you got this. You still have a few Jews left if they can hide and not be completely exposed. But the Islamic regime, the revolution, essentially imposed one religion, not just one religion, a political version of it to actually impose the rules around society. So what they want is not only just secularism, they want to actually just say, well, everybody should just do whatever they want. It's not the job of the state or government to impose on your lifestyle. We just want to have democracy. We want to have essentially a British liberal system when we talk about a free speech, free market capitalism, and a small government.
Is there any hint of that that motivation spreading beyond the boundaries, beyond the borders of Iran? Is it going to inspire others who feel under the cosh of a totalitarian regime? Is there any sign of that?
I mean, when it comes to the motivating potential uprisings, maybe, because actually some people forget or not think about the fact that the 2010-2011 Arab Spring was actually sparked, motivated to an extent because of the 2009 Green Movement in Iran. Now, the Green Movement in Iran, which was against the rigged election that they had, that failed, but that actually motivated the neighboring countries or the Arab world to actually, then they had different reasons, of course, to do their own uprisings, each country, Tunisia and Egypt and all the others. But I believe that definitely did motivate them. So this time, yes, absolutely. But I think we could go wider because Iran is a big power, whether you like it or not, in the region. Not to be completely optimistic, but we might be able to see at least smaller local regional level in China, maybe. In those places, we might be able to see, because we've already seen in Shanghai over the last few months, people standing up against the CCP. So we might be able to motivate those guys and situations that we're seeing around those countries.
Yes, when people, whoever they are and wherever they are, collectively understand the power that they have as a unit, anything is possible. Maya Towsey, YouTube commentator, political commentator, I'm delighted that we were able to make that connection with you eventually. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Another break is upon us. After that one, we'll look at what yesterday's mini-budget means for you and me, and also what one leading pub owner made of it. See you shortly.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio, and online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel. Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in my big opinion, this budget is annoying all of the right people. We don't just have a brand new Prime Minister, we've got a brand new government, and I'm loving it. A growing economy lifts everyone. My Mark Meets guest is talented X Factor singer Katie Waisel, and on my all-star panel, we've got former government minister under Margaret Thatcher, Edwina Currie. Plus, the EU chief Ursula von der Leyen says that they've got the tools with which to deal with Italy if they choose the wrong government. Thank God we're out. I'll see you at 9.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Events in recent days, specifically the death of Her Majesty the Queen, became the focus of media attention here and around the world, distracting us all from the day-to-day. There's no denying, however, that for millions of people, the abiding preoccupation was then and is now how they're supposed to cope with the winter ahead, overshadowed as it is by the worst cost of living crisis anyone can remember. Joining me now to consider the implications of the falling pound, the mini budget, the cost of lockdown, the spiking cost of energy, war in Europe, inflation, recession and the rest are business owners and commentators Bernie Spoforth and Adam Brooks. Good evening to you both.
Hello. Good evening. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too, Bernie. Good to see you, Adam. I'm sorry you're not in the studio, but here we are. Bernie, if I can come to you first of all, the question that preoccupies me more than any other is, have the British people properly grasped the scale of what's coming?
I think some have. I think most haven't. You know, for 2.5 years, people have been completely shielded and looked after by their government in a almost form of luxury communism. And they've been shielded from the things that hundreds of thousands of business owners have been watching over the past 2.5 years. And regardless of who had given this mini budget, be it Labour and their distribution of borrowed or taxed money to individuals, or be it Tories giving money to businesses, we aren't at the bottom of this problem. And all they've tried to do is fix the situation as we are now. A year from now, this problem won't be resolved, and they'll have to give more money to businesses and more money to people in order for them to be able to pay their living costs.
I don't understand, in my simplistic comprehension of these matters, why the only lever that anyone seems to pull is that one which creates more funny money. There's all different ways in which they're doing this, the borrowing, the quantitative easing and whatever, but it seems to me that it all boils down to just a larger and larger mountain of debt that's only prolonging agony.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing at the moment. And if you look at the economy in Britain historically, we sit on a seesaw. We've got boom one side and bust the other side, and the Bank of England sits in the middle, and it uses its only tool, that hammer of interest rates, to either slow things down if we're all doing really, really well, and make sure we try and save by putting interest rates up. And when things are going badly, they put interest rates down. The issue you have today is that our seesaw is bust on one side and bust even harder on the other side. And the only tool the Bank of England has is those interest rates. And because it's printed so much money to protect everyone for 2.5 years, the borrowing that the government is now about to do is going to cost it substantially more. Because interest rates continue to rise, because prices externally continue to go up, inflation continues to go up. And the only thing the Bank of England can do is put interest rates up. And all that will do is crush purchasing. It won't slow a market down that's already dead in the water. It will just add more and more pressure. And I don't really see where the government are going from this. Yes, I understand that they're trying to keep people employed. So Adam talks about hospitality a huge amount. And he's right. If people don't have any disposable income in their pocket, they can't go to hospitality and to the pub. And that is a huge problem for them. A little bit more disposable income will help. A VAT cut would have helped. Maybe that will come in the main budget. The pound being very low helps tourism. But if you've got a country pub where you don't get tourists, you're not helped. So metropolitan areas may find that the mini budget and tourists coming in do help them slightly, but it doesn't get rid of the debt problem, and it doesn't get rid of the problem of the normal average person on the street having double the price of energy bills, even though they've been capped. They've had a little bit back from the government in terms of NI, 340 quid a year, but interest takes that back off them. The government gave them a bit and the Bank of England took it away again. that's where we are.
Adam Brooks, you're a publican, as Bernie has noted there. You've been highly critical of the pressure your sector, the hospitality sector, has been under. What are your predictions for the months ahead?
Very difficult. I mean, you cut up a little bit there. Sorry, Neil. But yeah, look, there's really difficult times ahead. And I've been warning about this for like over a year. You know, my energy bills doubled at one of my pubs last November. I felt like I was shouting into a void. Myself and other hospitality figures have been we were screaming January, February, March not to put VAT back up to 20%, but Rishi Sunak ignored us. And, it was very detrimental to the industry. And it actually contributed, I think, about 1.4% to the rise in CPI. Now, I think without the energy cap this winter, we would have seen about 50, 60% of pubs being lost. Now, the energy cap has really helped a lot of us. And, I have been supportive of the government of that. I mean, it will be being paid for decades to come. But so would the bill of, a couple of million people being dumped on the benefit system or in the housing system. So there was no getting away from intervening here from the government. But from my sector, we wanted to see more. And a VAT cut was something we was really, really sort of pushing for. And it didn't come. Maybe business rates help as well. That didn't come. I feel like, they ignored us for other, industries, other sectors. And I think it's going to cost them dearly over the next 6 months.
Why it has been apparent to anyone watching that hospitality has been particularly hit to the point where it almost looks deliberate. Why, of all sectors, do you think hospitality, pubs, restaurants, clubs have been so under the gun? Why is that?
I think there's a lot of stigma with hospitality. People don't, a lot of people don't understand how much it contributes to the economy, how many people, it employs. It directly employs, I believe, about 2.5 to 3 million people in the UK, and it supports another 2.5 to 3 million indirectly from supply chains. It's a very, very important industry. It's one that I love. Obviously, I'm going to shout about it more than others. But, we already know that the restrictions during the COVID period, they had no evidence to shut us down like they did. They had no evidence to keep restricting us. You can say it was deliberate. To me, it just looks like incompetence. They still cannot prove why they needed to restrict our businesses. And they kept, I think the evidence that they kept going back to was a nightclub in, Asia somewhere. So, going back to that's still hurting us now. COVID loans, I've got 2 myself. There's people paying off debts from the first lockdown still. And now suddenly we're going into a winter where, yes, we've had our energy capped, and, thank you for that, but it's not enough. My little backstreet pub was looking at £8,000 a month electric come November. Thankfully, the government have intervened. It's probably going to be 3,500, 4,000. But that's 3,500, 4,000 just for electric. My utility bills are more than my rent at the moment. And if you told me that 3 years ago, Neil, I would have fell off the chair. These are not normal times. And sometimes we've got to think outside the box,
Yeah. Bernie, listening to Adam there, do you think in 6 months' time or a year's time that Britain will be a very different looking place?
I think we'll be in a much worse position than we're in now. Much worse. You only have to look at the cost of the supply chain. So Adam's right. Adam has huge costs in his energy bills and his utility bills, but he has huge costs in other things too. His replacement costs for chairs or tables, light bulbs, are all going to cost him more. His cleaners' replacement costs for all of their consumables are all going to cost them more. And I have heard people say, that this mini budget has helped the wealthy and it's helped large businesses. But you have to look at this from another point of view. Yes, cutting taxes for supermarkets hurts, right? I understand that because they make a large amount of profit. But their costs are growing exponentially. Everything they buy is increasing, and all they were ever going to do was put it on the consumer anyway. So the consumer would have ended up paying the supermarket far more if those tax cuts hadn't happened. What I think the danger is by this time next year, it's really going to depend on what's happening globally. And then you have those net zero policies. The government still can't tell me exactly what net zero means. What it means to the average person is that everything they buy goes up in price. You know, the EU are talking about traceability back to source. How do they think that's going to be impacted? Every item of clothing they wear. Really? They can't trace cotton back like that. And if they could, they'd have a nervous breakdown because they're picked by children. You know, 99% of cotton is picked by children. So the issue you've got is these ideological beliefs in something like net zero have a cost. And we're already facing massive cost increases. So as Adam says, you've got huge debt. You've got huge debt in individual businesses, not just the government. Now you've got energy price issues. You've got currency problems. And now you're going to do net zero? Really? I think we'll be in a much worse position next year.
We'll have to leave that there for now. Business owners and commentators Bernie Spofford and Adam Brooks, thank you so much for your time. We'll speak again.
Thank you, Neil.
Strikes me that the greatest sleight of hand they've pulled was doubling energy prices and selling it back to people as a solution.
Well, exactly.
By the clever trick of initially planning to quadruple them. Yeah. But now that they've only doubled them, we're all supposed to greet that with
and uniquely
with
in this country, allowing those energy companies to hold on to the profits.
Yeah. But imagine selling people a doubling in price of energy, and we're all
because it's not quadrupling.
Because we're all down on our hands and knees saying thanks. Thank you for only doubling my costs.
Yes.
After the break, I'll be joined by this week's.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England,
Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio,
And online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. There have been some dramatic developments in the last few days in Russia's war with Ukraine. On Wednesday, Vladimir Putin said he was not bluffing when he threatened to use nuclear weapons. On the same day, the Russian president announced a partial mobilisation that could see 300,000 men ordered to fight. That led to remarkable scenes of thousands of men apparently trying desperately to leave Russia. Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford is with me in the studio, as is Tom Buick. We can chat with both of you about this developing story all the time. Stuart, do you think Putin is bluffing?
One has to be very careful about assessing anything about Putin because his mind may not work in the same way as normal sane people like us. In terms of using nuclear weapons, I think you can never totally relax. But certainly on the tactical nuclear weapon front, it's known that the warheads have been in storage since the 1990s. Nobody knows if they've been well maintained or whether they'll still work. And of course, the warheads are not sitting on missiles or in artillery systems waiting to be delivered. They have to be outloaded. And as soon as they're outloaded from their arsenals and depots and bunkers, etc., the eyes in the sky will see that happening. And
what is a tactical nuclear warhead? We hear a lot about that. You know, everyone has only seen the imagery of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yes. But what does a tactical nuclear missile do?
Well, it's still a pretty fearsome weapon, but it's not a strategic nuclear warhead which would level London or anything like that. And you can actually dial in the yield that you're going to get from them. So in a battlefield situation, although they're terribly destructive, you can actually contain the amount of destruction to a certain extent. But I mean, it really ups the ante in any war.
Why? I've grown up watching footage of war in real time from all around the world. Footage from reporters and cameramen and embedded in front lines and all the rest of it. Why has there been nothing like that from the fighting in Ukraine? All we ever seem to see is aftermath.
Well, I think both militaries will be controlling media access to a certain extent. I don't think the Russian media will be allowed anywhere near their frontline troops, particularly when they're doing so badly. On the Ukraine side, I'm not really quite sure why that should be the case. There are journalists around, but they tend to be slightly further behind the lines and appear in liberated villages and record the mayhem.
But Tom, as a consumer of news, it's not a conventional war, is it?
No, it's not, and neither is it conventional to see our British intelligence services issuing daily intelligence briefings, which I've dipped into from time to time, and it's been fascinating. And just as a layperson looking in at what's happening with the conflict, I do think it's extraordinary that now Putin is in this position where he's having to mobilise his population. It drives a coach and horses through his idea of it being a special military operation if he's having to mobilise men essentially who are of combat age. And I think as well the other really extraordinary for me is again someone like
well beyond combat age in some cases.
Well beyond, I'm sure. But also, I remember watching documentaries like Threads. I remember actually feeling frightened of the Cold War when I was growing up as a child. This sort of idea of a nuclear weapon landing. I think we have to take this really seriously. What Putin is saying about going through this, these sham referenda in the Donbass and in the eastern part of Ukraine as a way of trying to manipulate the United Nations and international community into this notion of, but this is Russian territory, this is sovereign territory. This is now a pretext for using, whether they're tactical nuclear weapons or any kind of nuclear weapons, they will cause absolute mayhem and carnage on the whole continent of Europe, not least those two nuclear power stations also that have been bombed by Russian forces. So, again, what I look to is the likes of the White House and other Western leaders. At what point, when will they go on television and say to Putin internationally, "You use nuclear weapons, you can expect a response"?
Well, I think Biden has actually. I think Biden has done that.
Has he?
I think so.
We're not interested, it would appear, in a brokered peace, are we? A negotiated peace. That doesn't seem to be. That's as far away as it.
Well, there's no compromise that seems to be acceptable to either side. I mean, the Ukrainians are.
What would a compromise look like for you?
Well, I've postulated before that maybe if Russia gave Ukraine back Crimea and held on to Donbass or Luhansk, that might be acceptable. But I don't think it is, because obviously the big strategic prize in the area is the Crimea, because of the Black Sea and Sevastopol and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's... And the Ukrainians are saying that the war will not finish until every inch of Ukrainian soil has been returned.
Tragically for all the human beings involved.
Well, it's awful.
And history tells me you can't appease a dictator. I know that's probably an unfashionable view, some parts of the left. But
We're going to have to move on. It's time now for something perhaps uplifting rather than doom-laden. This week's Great Britain. The biggest half marathon in the world took place in the northeast of England earlier this month as 60,000 people did the Great North Run. But a trip of just over 13 miles wouldn't be much of a challenge for Carl Mowat, who once ran 8 half marathons in one go Council as part of his efforts to raise money to buy guide dogs. Yes, that indeed is his motivation. The man himself, Carl Mowat, joins me now. Hello, Carl.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Carl, what prompted you to raise money for this particular good cause? Why the guide dogs?
The guide dogs is very close to my heart. I've actually raised enough money to buy 3 guide dogs now. The first effort was back in 2021 when I ran 100 miles in a day, and that was to buy a guide dog called Andy. Basically, Andy's named after a very good friend of mine, Andrew Briggs, who passed away, and before he lost his life, he lost his sight. So we named that dog, that's the one in the picture, that's Andy now. He's 19 months old. And Andy is now going to his new owner down in
London. How much does it cost, Carl, to buy a guide dog? You know, when you talk about raising funds, what is the investment necessary? I think we may have lost Carl. Well, I can tell you, he's already run 104 miles, and it's not the only time that he's done it. He's done a distance in excess of 100 miles on 2 additional occasions. If we get him back, we can find out just how much money he has raised so far. Inspiring, though, Tom.
Yeah, always inspiring. Indeed, you have some great Britons on this show. And
what a great guy.
So, but I think it's so important. This tonight has been no exception. There's a lot of darkness out there. But like salt or chili pepper, you only need a little bit of good news to leaven the situation considerably. And someone running hundreds of miles to provide guide dogs for blind people. I mean, how can you not be inspired?
Well, indeed, and even the previous story about Ukraine and the fact that tens of thousands of ordinary Britons have opened up their homes.
Yes.
Without
although
question.
that has had some bumps along the way, I think. But generally speaking, I'm a great believer that humankind is essentially good. You know, when you strip everything away, most people are good, and there's a classic example.
I'm always amazed so often with the great Britons that we draw attention to. It's often people raising funds for good causes, but so often it's people who have been through the most appalling tragedy themselves, loss, either to themselves or they've lost loved ones or they're still going through terrible illness and all the rest. Or they've been in circumstances where they've come in contact with people whose circumstances are so different from our own, but their response, rather than to be felled in the face of it, is to stand up and do something for others, and it's in that they find their own salvation. I just find it
absolutely. I mean, people always say, "How do you ever get over the death of a child?" And of course, you never go over the death of a child, but a lot of people who've had that unfortunate circumstance have become involved in charities for children for the various diseases that have deprived them of their loved ones.
Yes. To get back, if I may, to the situation in Ukraine, is there an end in sight, or are we locked into some kind of forever war?
Well, I don't know if it'll be forever, but I think the fact that Putin is now recruiting another 300,000 soldiers shows that we're in for the long haul. And there's a redacted paragraph on the decree which may have up to 1 million. No one knows because it's been redacted. So I think that with the onset of winter, the fact that the Russians are not winning and that the Ukrainians are not losing, both sides will be taking a big breath and saying, come the spring, and I've already seen writing about it, come the spring, hostilities will